Good evening, and welcome to a whole new show. This is the Tuesday show, rising from the ashes of the last year's 2020 vision. We're going to come back to you still at the same time, 10 o'clock on Tuesdays, but in a slightly different format. My name's Jenny Fisher, and I'm the editor of East London News. And your Tuesday show is going to be a roundup of news, not only in East London, but from an East London angle. So we're going to look at world, national, local news, and in terms of what it means actually for um, our East London boroughs. And tonight we've got a mixed bag of reports to bring you. We're going to go back to the Assange campaign and look at the result. We're going to look at homelessness and rough sleeping in the COVID pandemic. And we're also going to look at the Royal London Hospital. You might have seen in the news an allegation that healthcare was very deficient there now. And we've got a report, well, not from the chalk face, of course, but anyway, from the hospital coming up. That's all coming up. But now I'm going to do two things. I'm going to say to you that you can telephone into the studio and talk to our guests or to me. And you can do that on 0208 1234507. That's our usual number, 0208 1234507. So you're very welcome to come in and join us, talk about what we're talking about, or to tell us about your campaign and what's important to you. So now, without any further ado, let's introduce our first guest, our live guest tonight, who is Maxine Walker. Welcome back, Maxine. Are you there? Oh,
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Yes, lovely, good.
Yeah.
Now, Maxine is for the Committee to Defend Julian Assange. And last time you were on, Maxine, it was a very popular discussion on looking forward to the extradition hearing and thinking what might be happening. And then, of course, 2 days later, we heard some quite good news. So take us through it, Maxine. What happened at the actual hearing, the extradition hearing?
Well, it was a very surprising occasion, really, because you will have seen on the television, perhaps, the crowd outside the Old Bailey, the crowd of supporters, had a message saying that the judge, Baraitser, had refused to extradite him. And there was jubilation. I mean, jubilation because it was such unexpectedly good news, because the hearings had not been conducted in a terribly fair way, and we really didn't expect a positive outcome. So when we heard that, obviously people were cheering and clapping and kissing each other, even though they had masks on, I expect.
That's kissing each other in a socially distanced way, I take
it.
it.
In a socially distanced way. Yes, with their elbows and all that sort of thing. Anyway, then we started to hear what the judgment was and read more of the details. And it is a victory. I'm sure about that. It's a victory along the road, though, is what I would say, and a very surprising victory. The grounds on which Judge Baraitser, and it's a very long judgment, and you can find it if you Google that judgment. The grounds on which she found that she couldn't extradite him were essentially his mental health, which has deteriorated a great deal over the last 10 years of increasing isolation and psychological torture. She felt that if he was extradited to the USA, that he would certainly be put in a supermax prison in the USA under special administrative measures. And these are the most harsh of measures that anyone can really experience. You're in solitary, you have no contact. The warders put the food through a hole in the door. And if there is a way of taking exercise for half an hour, perhaps, but lots of prisoners won't do it. You just go into another cell. and that's it. So, and you're very isolated. I think you can have 2 letters a month from family, or send 2 out, and it's hard to see your lawyer.
Yeah.
So, on every level, she found that there would be a hugely heightened risk of Julian Assange committing suicide were he sent to those circumstances. And then you have to look at the rest of the judgment. As I say,
Well,
it's a step.
before we do that, Maxine, I mean,
Yeah,
I must say that really what we were looking at was tantamount to torture, wasn't
yeah,
it? I mean, it's not just a harsh regime that he would have been sent to. But on the one hand, you know that the US authorities have a record of prisoners committing suicide,
yes,
and so that's very worrying. But on the other hand, you'd have thought that it might change now with the end of the Trump regime, but you would have thought that they would have done everything they could have possibly done to protect him, because they would have wanted to drag it out and to just inflict as much pain
yes,
as possible. So
yeah.
it's very good that so far has been, well, I was
It,
going to say
it,
avoided, but maybe it's just put off.
I mean, all along he has been treated by the judicial system, in the sense, why is he in Belmarsh? That's a high security prison. He's a completely non-violent person, and currently he finished his sentence for bail issues in September 2019. He's just been in there waiting on the pleasure of the USA to bring the case, and so on. And there have been a lot of delays because of COVID. So he's been there coming on for 2 years in Belmarsh. And the treatment he's received reminds me very strongly when I read about the Muslim prisoners who were held in there awaiting extradition to the USA. It's very similar treatment. He's been treated as a very, very dangerous man.
Yes. So anyway, I interrupted you,
Yeah.
didn't I? You were going on to look at the other parts of the judgment, I think,
Yes,
which
I
would
mean,
have
the
been
other
with the
part
legal
is
issues.
that, yeah, although this is a victory, it's not a secure victory, because essentially Judge Baretza accepted all the other planks of the US case against him. And I'll say a tiny bit about those later on. In doing so, she immediately caused danger, and everybody has recognized this, particularly the journalists and media NGOs involved in the campaign, that it represents a danger to particularly national security journalism, but also other kinds of journalism, a danger to a free press. It's already a very they've already seen 10 years of Assange being persecuted with an attempt to destroy him. And obviously reporters pull back then, so that there may be stories that they could write that they won't write, for fear. And so it's a very dangerous judgment. And also, immediately, the US prosecutors said that they were going to appeal. They said they're going to definitely appeal this judgment. And although at the end of her judgment, Judge Baretza says she discharges Julian Assange, most people would think that that means he could walk out the door. But of course, it doesn't. After 10 years of what the UN has described as arbitrary detention, for the most part, he was taken straight back to solitary in Belmarsh prison. And the bail hearing was set for the Wednesday, 2 days later, and he came, and Judge Baretza refused bail on the grounds that he was an escape. He would try and escape.
I mean, I don't know much about the legal system, or at least this part of the legal system, but you would have thought that somebody where there'd been a ruling that they couldn't be extradited, would then be released. And I don't understand why an authority can hold somebody after a judgment pending an appeal. It's terribly kind to the appellant, isn't it?
It's very kind. Yes, it is, because all sorts of guarantees and sureties were offered, and she still maintained that he might attempt to flee the jurisdiction. Although, of course, as he's got that ruling at the moment, this is probably one of the safer places that he could actually be. It's also the case that he has a partner and 2 young children here, and many other family ties here. And yet she still refused that. So the victory was tempered by all this, really. The fact that he was not allowed out, and he's been sent back to a prison where they're in solitary 23 and a half hours a day. They're locked down because of that's what the prisons have done during COVID to try and keep the numbers down. But it means they're in prison 23 and a half hours a day. They don't see anybody. They're given a mobile phone for short periods of the day so that they can phone their relatives. But, you know, there's a great variety of people in prison, and many of them have vulnerabilities and mental health problems, and it's a complete disaster for them. And in addition, there were, by the end of November, which is the latest figures I can find, 68, I think, cases of 68 cases of COVID in Belmarsh. So that's 2 months ago, 6 weeks ago. So it will have gone up by now.
That must be a massive percentage.
I don't know what the actual percentage is. I didn't work that out, actually, but because they've locked everybody up, the figures have probably not risen as fast as they have outside. I think there are currently in the English and Welsh prisons 3,460 positive tested prisoners and 72 dead.
72.
72, yeah.
All right, okay. Well, COVID is going to be a theme running through our other issues tonight, and I think we've got a guest waiting at the back of the studio who could come in and join the conversation now. Councillor Paul Merry should be joining us from his bivouac in Redbridge. Oh, there you are, Paul. Yes. Paul, this is Maxine. Maxine, this is Paul.
Hello.
And Paul and I will be talking shortly about...
Good evening, Jennifer and Maxine.
We'll be talking later about COVID in Redbridge. Paul always calls me strange things, Jennifer being one of them. Anyway, Maxine, Paul, have you got any questions to ask Maxine? What you would like to hear about in terms of the Assange verdict?
No, I only came in on the tail end of the debate there, having had to eat between meetings online. I was sort of pleasantly surprised that the judgment went the way it did, and that Mr. Assange wasn't sent back to the madhouse that is currently run by Mr. Trump. Remains to be seen what happens in the future, I suppose. But let's hope we're all still here and Mr. Trump doesn't press the button in between now and his departure from the White House, and we'll take it from there, I suppose.
Well, when this show's over, Paul, you can
survive COVID as well.
You can have a look at the East London News website. I've just put an article up. The speculation is he's going to attack Iran, rather than all of us. But there we go.
My money was on Mexico.
Well, that's possible. So anyway, you have to read that online.
Anything could happen with that gentleman, I think.
Maxine, what's going to happen now? That's what we need to know.
I was just going to say that the illogicality of the bail refusal is that she refused to extradite him because of his health, and he's been sent back to this solitary confinement. Prisoners have not seen their families since March, I think it is. So they don't have that family, contact and support. And in fact, the Evening Standard Court correspondent quoted a QC on his Twitter about the plight of the Belmarsh prisoners. And the QC said, it is unacceptable in terms of humanity. You wouldn't put a dog in conditions like that. So that was his judgment. I mean, from my point of view and our point of view, Julian Assange is a political prisoner. He has faced 10 years of persecution, including psychological torture. And this is only worsened by the conditions in Belmarsh. And he's been persecuted in this way because he exposed the war crimes of the US and its NATO allies, including the UK. And yet the people who started those wars walk free and are honoured and so on.
And talk rubbish, yes.
And talk rubbish, yeah. So if you want me to say a bit about the judgment and why people, I mean, to give you one quote, Rebecca Vincent, who's from Reporters Without Borders, an NGO, and she has been fantastic in fighting to monitor this trial as an observer. And they were all granted, the NGOs were all granted observer status, and it was removed on the first day of the hearings. And even last Monday at the Old Bailey, I saw her in the queue and spoke to her. She was in the queue to try and get in, and spoke to her, and she said she'd been continually threatened by the police. And that had continued despite her telling them that she was from an NGO that was going to observe the trial. So she did get in.
That says a great deal about the process, doesn't it?
It does. They've tried to keep it very secret. I think one of the reasons that this kind of campaign turned the corner a bit was that there were some fantastic journalists on independent media really reporting it properly and in detail. And I think that started to get round, and there was a change of atmosphere, really, where more support came.
Well, certainly we found, we did that broadcast with you a couple of weeks ago, and we found that generated a great deal of interest. So I would encourage people, if anyone's not seen it, to go back on the the VOD Talk Facebook page or YouTube channel and catch up with that. So you get a great deal of information, and often it's not people not okay with news. We're going to have to bring this item towards an end now, Maxine. Our time has gone very quickly. But just tell me, what is it that we can do? We hope the campaign had an effect, but clearly there's another stage. When do you think the US might get round to lodging their appeal? How long have we got?
Well, they only have 2 weeks to do it from last Monday, so they have to lodge that, and then it might take months while they prepare the appeal. And the appeal will be solely on the ground she found on, which is the health issue in the US prison system. So that will be the grounds of their appeal. That will be what they'll fight it on. But also, the campaign goes on, the struggle goes on, the fight goes on, and the more people who join in whatever way they can. And I've got a few ways. I've sent you, Jenny, 3 links to Twitter pages of a very good journalist, Mohammed El-Malzi, who has covered this trial really very, very well indeed. And also an interview with Niels Meltzer, the UN rapporteur on torture, that was on the Grey Zone, and a link to our committee. And that will give you lots of information about what you can do. I would say people need... The protesting is very difficult at the moment of the streets because, and even outside the prison, they were threatened and had to leave, even though they were very distant from each other. So I think first inform yourself about the case. It's looks like a very complicated case, and in some ways it is, but it's about the exposure of war crimes and the persecution of the people who expose them, and in particular Julian Assange. Secondly, once you've done that, start writing to your MP. Very few MPs have spoken out on this, and there's an issue which there are so many issues, such as the conditions in the prison, the bail refusal, And also some of her findings are really very, very dangerous for a free press. So you could do that. Our committee feed leads to other links to letters that you could write to other people, like the governor of the prison. Talk to your friends, talk to your family, encourage them to at least look into this a little bit and start to, if they agree, join what is an increasingly strong and vigorous campaign, so that we have, there's the first victory. We must fight on until we see Julian Assange free. We must not allow the criminalization of journalism.
Yes, I mean every year, sort of, you get new government documents released, don't you? And you think, oh, blimey, that happened 30 years ago. And what we don't want on this one is sort of to wait 30 years to find out what governments have conspired to do.
I won't be around, so
no, I won't be around either. But somebody will pick it up for us, I'm sure. But we don't want that to happen. So we've got to find out now, and we've got to keep campaigning. So yes, writing to MP sounds good. We'll keep covering the issue on East London News. Hope you'll come back again and update us on the campaign, and we'll take it from there. Okay, have you anything to add, Paul? Are you there?
Yeah, yes.
Yes, he's there.
No, nothing to add on that subject, really.
Okay, so Maxine, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye. And Paul, or Councillor Merry, as I suppose I should refer to you sometimes, you've been treading
You can call me Paul, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Paul, you've been keeping to the right course, notice the pun, in Redbridge for a while. But today you've had a briefing on what the council's doing on COVID and what the situation is in that borough, and we're sort of going to be turning towards that a bit now. It's obviously a very serious issue, and I know we do have a lot of listeners in the Redbridge area. So how's it going out there? Has the council been able to do anything commendable?
Well, a year ago, I never thought I was going to turn into a public health obsessive. It's not really my background, but sadly, it seems that Redbridge is now famous as COVID Central. I'm informed by our Director of Public Health that we're now the second highest case rate in the country. That's the number of infections. I think we're led only by Havering, and I suspect that's a figure for the UK, not just for England. So it's a bit grim up here, and people are not wildly happy. It's strange how the case rate seems to have massively increased over the last 4 weeks, which seems to have coincided with students returning from college and university. And of course, in Redbridge, we have a very high undergraduate and postgraduate student population. So my suspicion is that...
That's what I was going to ask you, really. I mean, has the council got its own theories as to where this increase has come from? I had thought about it's people ignoring the restrictions, or it's just one of those things, or it's schools. And you brought a new thing in here. You know, sort of saying students coming home from distant
I don't think
universities.
It's greatly helped the situation, but I suppose we couldn't leave them all. My one's come back. We couldn't leave them all to fester, I suppose, in wherever they happen to be.
There's
a number of factors. Sorry?
Is your student child still with you, or has he had to go back?
Well, no, he's got no return date yet. But in the meantime, he's working. He's studying online from my upstairs room. So I've now got 4 of them in the house. 3 others plus me, the comrade wife, and the comrade number 1 son and comrade number 2 son, which means my broadband's under great stress a lot of the time. But they've all given up Call of Duty tonight, so we might be able to make this work here. But
we must thank the young Merrys for resisting the call of Call of Duty.
I do occasionally, yes.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get back to Redbridge.
There's a number of factors. I mean, the primary one seemed to be, according to the Director of Public Health, that we've got a very high commuter population in Redbridge, along with Barking and Dagenham. and Havering, so people move around a lot. We've also got a lot of key workers. I mean, Redbridge has quite a high percentage of public sector workers, NHS workers in particular. Other East London boroughs and outer London boroughs, I mean, they've got an awful lot of key workers in Havering and Dagenham and Redbridge who are having to go into central London to maintain basic services. So it's hardly surprising that the more working class boroughs out to the east have got higher rates because they're full of working class people who have to go in to do the nasty, dirty jobs that keeps society running. So Redbridge is not as working class, but we do have a large number of people in lower paid jobs. And then on top of that, we've got a lot of public sector workers, particularly NHS workers. So it's not been great news. And, we're famous finally. We're not famous for that much in Redbridge, but we're now number 2 in the country. So a little bit of extra help from the government wouldn't go amiss, but that's been sadly lacking because we were one of the London boroughs pre-Christmas who were calling for the early closure of schools. And, of course, the government's response was for I forget the clown's name. Which clown is it that's education secretary?
I don't know.
Williamson.
Yeah.
Yes, so no sooner had we said, along with about 5 other London boroughs, that we needed to close schools imminently to stop the spread, than we were threatened with legal action. And then 5 days later, he changed his mind entirely and said schools must close now. The virus is rampant.
I mean, obviously nobody's actually sort of written a textbook on how government should respond to mass pandemics yet, because it hasn't done it for 100 years. So I do have a bit of sympathy with government sort of being a bit slow occasionally or whatever, but this is just getting too much, isn't it? The contradictory nature and changing their minds and...
Well, if you're trying to plan a response at a local level, and of course central government loves heaping responsibilities onto us and saying, oh, you're down at the coalface, you can sort this out. But then you get constant contradictory orders, lack of funding. I mean, central government's always been very good at handing down responsibilities to local government, but never with any funding attached, or not very much. And this lot are just ace experts at it. They are so centralist. It is unbelievable. I used to think the Thatcher government was a bit centralist, but this lot leave them standing. I think I can think of cabinet members under Thatcher who were vaguely competent in a sort of right-wing way. This lot are just clowns led by a buffoon.
I think my theory is that there's a bit of sort of Blairism which hasn't quite rubbed off yet, which is sort of deeply rooted in sort of just a hope for the best. But yeah, I mean, you remind me.
This is my theory about Boris being a libertarian social democrat at heart, and throwing money around like crazy to very little good effect, while claiming to be libertarian in view and not wanting to have to clamp down on us all. I have to say, during a pandemic, I've become a bit more statist than I used to be.
Well, it's
I see people going down left, right, and centre around me, and I really don't fancy a dose of this myself, to be honest.
It's always interesting to hear what the right wing of the Labour Party, how they're analysing the Boris government. Those of us on the left, I think, are probably tending a bit more to just the plain incompetence mode.
There's an awful lot of incompetence. And
it seems he had such a good training ground as Mayor of London, didn't he? Was it 8 years he did?
Yes, with several financial mishaps.
Issues, yes.
Yeah. Yes, issues.
Yes.
Bridges and cable cars.
So we must move on. But before I let you go, Paul, I mean, what can local government do about it? I know Redbridge was in the forefront of asking for more money. And,
well,
that does need to be done.
We campaign, but there's limits. No, I mean, it's largely down to enforcement now. The governments seem to be getting serious about enforcing the lockdown. Well, the only people who can do it are local governments. So we need enforcement money.
And
We've been prosecuting bars, shisha bars, cafes that have been open during lockdown. We don't like crypto capitalist criminals
who
know, flout the rules.
Do you know? Yes, that's probably why Boris only rode out as far as the Queen Elizabeth Park and didn't make it all the way to Leafy Redbridge, ride past your trees. But what do you know what Redbridge is doing in terms of rough sleepers? Because that's something we're going to be looking at towards the end of the programme.
Yeah, we're having a nightmare with people with no recourse to public funds because we took them all in, and of course largely they're still in. We've got a long-term care and rehabilitation programme that we're initiating, but all the funding has now disappeared, so we're having to pay for it out of our own resources. But the only alternative is, which would morally reprehensible, but pragmatically would be extremely bad, to boot them all out on the streets so that they mill around and catch the disease and then start spreading it. It makes no pragmatic sense to have people out on the streets rough sleeping, apart from the morally reprehensible nature of it. So the government has got to give on the NPRF issue and just accept it as a public health reality that this issue's got to be dealt with.
That's certainly something.
We're putting a plan together at the moment that we're about to deliver to the relevant government department at communities and local government. So we'll see how they react to that.
As you say, centralism
crossed.
again. Yeah, everything's devolved except the final decision. Paul, thank you very much, or I should say, Councillor Merry, thank you very much. What's your ward again? Where do you represent? I keep forgetting.
Wanstead Park, because we have a very big park with a lot of trees.
Paul, thank you for sparing a moment from sitting in your home, admiring your trees, and giving us an insight into how Redbridge, what the situation is in Redbridge with COVID. It's alarming to hear. I wish we hadn't had to hear it, but thank you for pushing it from your briefing.
It's grim for most of East London, and really walking the lady dog in the trees around Wanstead Park has been about one of the few things that's kept me going the last few weeks. So.
No, I've actually not been out. I've stopped going.
No, I suspected you were still in shielding, but fingers crossed it will become a better and happier new year.
Indeed. Okay, well, we'll certainly try to do that with our Tuesday show, and hopefully you'll come back and join us again very soon. So with that, I know you're not very well, Paul, so we'll let you go and have the rest of your evening, let you go and fall over.
Just communal garden gastric flu.
Oh, right.
I hope.
Okay, well, go and enjoy it, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for coming on tonight. And,
okay, no pleasure.
Okay, see you later.
Cheers, thanks, Jenny.
For our viewers, we've got two more reports coming for you tonight, and they're both picking up the COVID theme again. And I can't remember now which one. I think it's the hospital one we're going to show next. And this is a report we noticed earlier in the week. There were reports in the press that something was happening at the Royal London Hospital. Were they trying to pull the wool over our eyes? Were they trying to cover something up? And there was some rumours about an internal memo saying there was only going to be disaster medicine going on. Now, of course, it is grim. We looked into the memo in full, which didn't really say what the mainstream press had quoted. It did say those things, but it was very selective quoting. And we talked to a number of medics around the borough. Now, most of them would not come on air and speak out about their workplaces. And also, of course, they're too busy working. So we were very kindly assisted by Carol Saunders of Tower Hamlets Keep Our NHS Public, Tower Hamlets Comp, who went out and spoke to various practitioners around Tower Hamlets, looked up the figures for East London, and she's prepared a report from us, which I think we're going to hear now. So this is Carol from Tower Hamlets Comp.
Hello, Jenny. Thank you for inviting me onto your podcast. So just to say to your listeners that I'm the press contact for Tower Hamlets Keep Our NHS Public, and we campaign to keep the NHS publicly provided and free to all at the point of use. So right now, we're seeing NHS workers and staff in local general practice carrying a terrific load for our whole community. I did a ring round of our contacts today just to find out how things stand currently in Tower Hamlets. And I'll start with the hospital news. So as of 8 AM yesterday, the 4 Barts Health NHS Trust hospitals, which are the Royal London Hospital, St Bart's, Whit's Cross and Newham, had 828 COVID patients. 73 were newly diagnosed within the last 24 hours, and 205 people were in critical or enhanced beds. By 5 PM on Sunday, the Trust's pandemic toll had reached 1,193 deaths, with 7,176 patients having recovered and been discharged. Sadly, the deaths have included 5 members of staff so far. Despite the extremely high levels of infection in North East London, our local hospitals had a lower percentage death rate than trusts elsewhere during the first wave, thanks to our fantastic staff, and survival rates have carried on improving. But we're now in a frightening new phase of the pandemic and things are truly dire. Some listeners may have read about the alarming leaked email from Royal London Hospital managers to staff on the 29th of December, which said, "We are now in disaster medicine mode. We are no longer providing high standard critical care because we cannot. Every hospital in North East London is struggling, some with insufficient oxygen supplies or with insufficient nursing numbers." On the ground, we're hearing that staff are now desperately tired. After 10 months of fighting the pandemic, Royal London Hospital nurses are caring for 3 very sick patients each instead of the normal 1. And in fact, our reading of the full email is that managers are also desperately worried about the well-being of their staff. The email reassures them that they are doing their best in impossibly challenging circumstances. It says, "Believe it or not, Royal London Critical Care is coping well relative to some sites." So we're hearing that existing staff are taking on extra shifts, having leave cancelled, taking on new clinical roles, while retired GPs and other healthcare workers tell us they're being bombarded with emails requesting their help at the hospital. Local GPs who've been taking on hospital shifts tell us that there's a lot of goodwill and collaboration on the ground. Primary and secondary care are working together to improve the flow of patients, with GPs keeping patients stable and safely at home where possible, and helping the hospital with the new family liaison support service, which stays in contact with patients' relatives. Meanwhile, 999 and 111 calls have soared across the capital. There are ambulances queuing in double lines around the block at Royal London Hospital, which has been particularly badly hit because patients can't be admitted to non-existent beds. Last week, a Royal London Hospital spokesman admitted that they'd been treating patients in ambulances since the start of January. And of course, for every ambulance in that queue, there's one less on the road. So waiting times for ambulances have risen alarmingly too. We're in a pandemic, so things would always be difficult. But the fact remains that when things kicked off last February, Britain had one of the lowest hospital bed numbers in the OECD. We've lost a staggering 53% of hospital beds since 1987 and 75,000 beds since 2000. But bringing back temporary beds has been easy compared to coping with the staff shortages. When people ask what happened to the Nightingale Hospital at the Excel, the answer is that a shortage of nurses meant that only 51 patients could be treated there. The shortages reflect years of flatlining pay, Brexit putting off European nurses, and the introduction of student loans for nurses instead of grants. A lot of chickens coming home to roost. So what about the local vaccination effort? Well, you'll be pleased to hear that on the plus side, the GP Care Group, which is a community interest company set up jointly by GP surgeries across Tower Hamlets, they've been vaccinating the over 60s since the over 80s since the 15th of December. You may well have seen a picture of a certain rather famous Limehouse resident, Ian McKellen, getting his jab from a popular Aberfeldy practice GP on the 17th. The main vaccination site in Tower Hamlets is a well-organised setup at Queen Mary University in the Arts Research Centre on Mile End Road. However, the Cable Street GP surgery in E1 and the Newby Place surgery in E14 are also now vaccinating people more locally. So all of these centres are staffed by our GPs, practice staff and other healthcare staff, including retired staff who have been re-registered. We know of 3 retired GPs who are currently being processed, and we can confirm that the requirements have really now been simplified. So in Tower Hamlets, we've already vaccinated thousands of the over 80s, care home residents, and health and social care staff. So the energy and enthusiasm are there, and everyone's doing a fantastic job. But it's not all good news. We're being told that the vaccine deliveries are hopelessly unreliable, and it's unclear why. The time taken to approve batches and a shortage of vials will probably turn out to be part of the problem, but no one seems to know for sure. This means that staff doing admin are having to call people to cancel appointments, and this is going to need to be resolved if the government has any hope of meeting the targets that it's set itself. You may also have heard that the Excel Centre has been reopened as a national vaccination centre. When your priority group is being vaccinated, you will be able to self-refer yourself to this centre as well, using a national online booking system. But again, it's all going to come down to whether the supplies are there. So a final message, the people I've spoken to today wanted me to pass on some clear messages from them. Firstly, this is a vicious virus that kills young people, not just old people, as well as giving a large number of people long COVID symptoms for weeks or months. It's essential that we all keep contacts to a minimum to avoid catching and spreading the virus. Their plea, please follow lockdown rules. And secondly, be ready for vaccination. It's free. The vaccines are well tested and safe, far safer than catching COVID. You will get a phone call or a number to call when it's time for your priority group to be vaccinated. But you do need to be registered with a GP for this to happen. Tower Hamlets GPs want you to know that everyone can sign up to a GP, whatever your immigration status, and whether you have a permanent address. It's essential for all of our public health that everyone gets the jab. And thank you.
I really would like to thank Carol Saunders from Tower Hamlets, Keep Our NHS Public. As I said, so many health workers have things they want to say, but were not able to come on air themselves. And she's taken a great deal of time to prepare that report and to give you an accurate rendition of what people are saying. So I hope I thought that was fascinating. So I hope you agree, and it's given you a bit of an insight into what's going on. Again, let's hope we can come back to this topic in future weeks. I'm just going to add one bit of research that came in to me direct, which is from a doctor at a London hospital who has reported that they are now treating patients. You may have seen on the mainstream media that doctors are now going out and treating patients in ambulances, and one doctor says he's now going out and treating patients in the back of taxis because there's no beds and all the ambulances already have patients in them. So no matter how you get to the hospital, it takes a while to get in. We've taken our eye off the ball with the health service. We've not kept it properly funded. Many governments are responsible, but we also have to remember that we as health service users have to do our bit to keep the service there. One last issue we're going to look at, and this is a very brief one. Earlier in the week, I spoke to Tom Zagoria, who's also guested on various podcasts and VOD talk shows for us. I spoke to Tom about homelessness and particularly about rough sleeping. Shortly after we spoke, the government did in fact come up with a bit of extra money for councils to help the house rough sleepers, but I don't think we can claim cause and effect there. So for the moment, what I'm going to do is just play you a very short interview that I did with Tom just about homelessness and rough sleeping and why it's a public health issue. So if we could just see that report now, please. And with us today, we have Tom Zagoria, who's a member of the Labour Homelessness campaign. And we're just going to have a quick chat with him about homelessness at the moment. So welcome, Tom. I hope you're there. Yes. Hi. Happy New Year and all that. And obviously, this is an even more important issue to look at than the New Year. Just tell us briefly, if you can, what is the scale of homelessness at the moment?
So it's bad and it's going to get worse. The situation at the minute is, even prior to the COVID-19 crisis, there were hundreds of thousands of people experiencing homelessness, is not having a permanent home of their own across the country. And of that, there were tens of thousands. The government's official figures said it was around 5,000. That's a woeful underestimate. There were, I think, under most estimates, at least around 30,000 people who were sleeping rough on the streets. Now, the situation is complicated. It's changing a lot. There are some local authorities where a lot of rough sleepers have been brought in off the streets, but there are a lot of places at the minute where, because of woeful government underfunding, years of austerity, the government's hostile environment against migrant rough sleepers, preventing them from being able to be accommodated, and the fact that we've got a crisis for especially private renters in this country at the minute, and there's newly homeless people going out onto the streets for the first time every day. So the situation is getting quite bad this winter.
Okay, well, no wonder it's coming up as an issue. Obviously, when we talk about homelessness, it's not only rough sleepers who are homeless. There are many other categories of homeless people, homeless at home and so forth. But rough sleepers obviously are giving, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, the most cause for concern. And the government recognised that last March, didn't it, when it first went into lockdown? And it came up with a scheme called Everyone In. What was that about then?
Well, I suppose I'd give credit where credit is due, and I wouldn't give that credit to the government. I think that scheme was brought up from the bottom up. There were grassroots activist groups like Streets Kitchen, Museum of Homelessness, which had been pushing for something like that. Basically, the idea behind it was you don't have hotels that are in use. You've got a lot of empty space, so you house every rough sleeper in those spaces without condition. That's something that the government came round to. It's framed as being a government implemented scheme, but they weren't actually the ones who were carrying it out. What they did do was a letter to every local authority, instructing them to bring everyone who was on the streets off the streets, and they could use these measures to do it. And they put in a bit of government funding, about £3.2 million for that initial run, which is nowhere near enough, given the scale of the crisis, given the fact that, services for single homeless people have been cut by over £1 billion each year since 2010, since the Tories came in. So it's absolutely, it's a drop in the ocean. But when initial Everyone In, the reason why Everyone In worked at the start, the reason why it was able to get, I think by now around 33,000 people into some form of accommodation, was because local authorities thought, well, this is a big change. This is a change in rhetoric from the government. This is perhaps the start of a bigger effort to end homelessness. And that's kind of how it was doing at the start. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that since.
Has the government not brought it back in again for this lockdown?
So the government sort of has now, and this is a very recent update. This is in the last 24 hours. The government has sent a letter to local authorities saying that they should redouble their efforts, and it has added more funding. So it's put around £10 million behind this latest round of funding, and said that, you know, local authorities should try and house people, and in addition, they should put them on the road to vaccination, ensure that they're registered with GPs, things like that. These are things that are important. That £10 million is going to be useful, but with the scale of the fact that, you know, local authorities prior to, even prior to COVID, were spending around £140 million per year in overspending in just to meet the government's obligations in homelessness services. So they were already, you know, going into debt, having to cut down on other services just to do what they were doing prior to COVID. And what they were doing prior to COVID wasn't enough because homelessness was growing. So the level of government spending is basically minuscule. This £10 million will be useful, but the problem is, will local authorities, how are they going to interpret that? In the first lockdown, they interpreted that as, let's actually get everyone in off the streets, because clearly the government are committed to this. This time, they've seen the government didn't act in November. They did not bring back everyone in. And even if they're sort of saying everyone is back in vogue again this time, they've not actually provided the surety, the certainty to say you're meant to house everyone, including people who aren't priority need, including people who don't have the right immigration status. There's a lot of people with no recourse to public funds who don't get housing benefit. It's very expensive for local authorities to accommodate them, and there are even potential legal challenges that it's not legal to give them accommodation, and that's a lot of rough sleepers, especially in London. So what we,
I mean, it's really of concern to everybody, isn't it? I mean, some people might say that £10 million, I mean, it's not even really a subsidy for anything. It's just £10 million, which the government has asked councils to hand over to private hoteliers whose hotels are empty, who are not getting any income at the moment, and may well be benefiting from other government schemes. So, and obviously everybody's got an interest in this, because if we're going to, you know, quell COVID via vaccination, you can't be vaccinated on the streets, can you? That's ridiculous. You need to be part of the system for that. So it's obviously a very serious thing. Okay, so we want everyone in to come back, I presume, and we want local authorities to have enough money to house people, because people who are housed end up paying rent. So really, it should be cost neutral and maybe even profitable, shouldn't it? And the last thing we need to know from you, Tom, on this one is, what can activists do? People who are listening to you and are horrified by the statistics and the report, what actually can people do to try to put pressure on the government?
So there's quite a lot that you can do in terms of getting involved. One thing I think at just a personal level is, if you see a rough sleeper out on the streets, still go and talk to them. Keep your 2 meter social distance, but, you know, see what they need, see what might be able to help. Ask them, always ask them first, in my view, but ask them whether they would like to be referred to services to try and get them off the streets. There's a couple of ways that you can do that. One is through StreetLink. Just Google what StreetLink is. But again, always ask them first, particularly if they're a migrant rough sleeper, because there have been problems. The government has brought in new rules on the 1st of December, which said that for migrants who are in certain categories on work visas, student visas, ancestry visas, just rough sleeping alone is enough to lose your right to remain in the UK. So you don't want to set someone up for deportation inadvertently. Ask them first, but then refer them through to StreetLink if they want help getting off the streets. I think in general as well, we need to prevent a new wave of homelessness, because that's a huge percentage of the crisis. The government has, in its latest announcement on Friday, extended the eviction ban through to the 21st of February, but they've changed the legal language in it a little bit. So now the eviction ban doesn't apply to people who have had at least 6 months of rent in arrears, which obviously the COVID crisis has been going on a lot more than 6 months. So there are going to be a lot more people who are going to be vulnerable to eviction. So I think definitely join the London Renters Union. They're doing fantastic work. If you're based in London, to fight back against those evictions. In addition to that, there are illegal evictions happening all the time, but there's a huge number of people who are very vulnerable to being forced into homelessness at this point in time. Speak out, speak to your local council, try and ask them whether they are housing, whether they are implementing everyone in, and whether they're implementing everyone in respect to everyone, including people with no recourse to public funds, because they are a huge category of people that a lot of local authorities are just trying to wash their hands of at the minute because they're not getting that funding from the government. But everyone needs to be housed. In Liverpool, in Haringey, in Islington, and a few good local authorities across the country, they are continuing everyone in, including for people with no recourse to public funds. Every local authority needs to take a stand and do that as well. So I would say, contact your MP, demand immediate real implementation of everyone in, and join the London Renters Union and fight back against the rising tide of homelessness.
And we'll try to follow that up in East London News. Tom, we're very grateful to you for coming on. And we also encourage our viewers to Google the Labour Homelessness Campaign and get involved with that if you're able to. Otherwise, we'll certainly use the East London News to approach some of these councils and in East London and ask them what they're doing. So thank you very much for the update. We'll let you go, and we'll see you again soon, I hope.
Thanks very much, Jenny.
I again found that completely fascinating. I hope you did too. So that's been our first Tuesday show. I've found it challenging but fascinating putting it together, and I'd like to thank all the people who gave their expertise and their time to help us bring you this show. I hope you found it of interest too. As we go forward, I'll just say two things. One, we do want to make this your show as well. Not entirely open access, but if you've got something you're campaigning on, if you've got something you're worried about, come forward and we'll see if we can put you on air and you can share your concerns or your issues with other people in East London and get some support. Second, I'd like to apologise for this being such a gloomy hour that we've spent together, because it's largely been bad news. But in that gloom and bad news, there's also hope. And there's hope from the strength that we can get if we can act together and help define the kind of society in which we live. We'll be back next week. We have a special show for you next week. Tom will be back as well, actually. Next week on the 19th, on Tuesday. We'll be 24 hours away from President Joe Biden being inaugurated as a president over in the USA. And so we're going to be looking at that with Tom as our guide to help us. You recall he grew up in the USA, and we've got some other special guests coming to give us some eyewitness accounts and some different views on what's going on over there. It's a long way away from where most of us are based here in the UK, but whatever happens in the USA, it's going to have a big effect on us all. So thank you very much for watching our first show. Try to remember next week, we've called our show now the Tuesday show, so you should find that easy to remember. Get in touch during the week, otherwise we'll see you again. It's 10 o'clock on Tuesday. Good night. Hey.